For sure.
Somebody here who, confidently thinks what they think, prepares for what they're about to do, doesn't sweat the small stuff, has a vitality and kind of joy as they go about it, picking their tasks, and then a love for the tasks as they do them. Wow, that's a more specific type of person that's really admirable, and I'm really getting a kick out of it.
Welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Caleb Ontiveros,
And I'm Michael Tremblay.
and today we're going to be talking about courage, one of the cardinal virtues. It's a central one for the Stoics, of course, and we're going to be talking about what it is, talk about the subcomponents of courage, something that's not talked about as often. And then if we have some time, some of our thoughts about what the Stoic tradition gives us to become more courageous.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Let's do it.
Yeah, we're just going to dive right into this one, sort of a deep dive into one of the cardinal virtues. In addition to courage, you have moderation or discipline, wisdom, and then justice. So the question is, what is courage for the Stoics? At the highest level, courage is the knowledge of what to avoid. That's all it is. So, and I think that the obvious next question here is, why are the Stoics speaking about knowledge as opposed to something like the ability to overcome fear, which might be a popular understanding of courage, or perhaps another account would be the mean between recklessness and cowardice that would be an Aristotelian account of courage. But the Stoics, they're talking about knowledge, a particular kind of knowledge, the knowledge about what to avoid. And I think it's important to remember here just a little bit of Stoic psychology to get this going, which is that the Stoics are focusing on knowledge because that's what drives our decisions and judgments. And our decisions and judgments are what make up our character. And for the Stoics, what matters, the happy life is the life lived with excellent character. And hence, what do you want to avoid? You want to avoid any damage to your character, risks. You want to avoid not acting rightly, not acting skillfully, and so on, and instead pursue the excellence of character. So that's very briefly, I think, at the high level, what courage is. Do you want to add any details to that, Michael?
No, I mean, I think you did. I think you explained it well, Caleb. This is an idea we talk about all the time. That idea in Stoicism about how who you are follows from what you think. So the Stoics think simply, you do what you think, right? You pursue what you think is good. You avoid what you think is bad. So your behavior corresponds to your beliefs, your thought patterns. So if you have good beliefs, good thought patterns, you have good behavior. Then what is good thinking? Well, it's knowledge. It's thinking that aligns with the truth of the matter. So if you know what to avoid, and not like somebody told you this, but like you really understand why these are the things you should be afraid of, and you know what isn't worth your fear. Because the corresponding idea is, if you know what to avoid, if you know all the things that are in the avoid bucket, you also know all the things that are outside of the avoid bucket. Things like damage to your reputation, or other things we might be afraid of, things that we consider kind of like irrational fears today. And so if you have knowledge about that, you really understand it, you're going to act in accordance with that, and you're going to be all right. I think another way to think about this is the opposite side, which is like, well, if that's courage, what is cowardice? Well, cowardice or lack of courage is trying to avoid something that isn't worth avoiding, or being afraid of something that isn't deserving of fear, right? That's what ignorance looks like on this picture. Knowledge looks like, well, only avoiding what deserves avoiding, and not being afraid of anything else.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So a concrete example of this from Stoic history is we have the Stoic Cato the Younger, a ancient Roman politician, something he was known for was being exceptionally principled. And one way he showed that was by, as soon as he received a position in the Roman treasury, and it was the kind of position that was generally seen as a stepping stone, the sort of thing aristocrats wouldn't take seriously, or just perhaps a certificate of sorts on your way to much more prestigious positions. Cato knew that there was corruption in the treasury, so he essentially purged the set of corrupt officials, cleaned the books. And in doing this, he risked his reputation, his chances of political office, because those were, bureaucrats essentially who were keeping the records in the way that some Roman elites wanted them to. And the records of credits, debts, and so on had a lot of political power. So even though it seemed like perhaps it's clearly the right thing to do, it was a risk to his reputation, to his political prospects, and of course was probably uncomfortable in a real sense. But what it wasn't a risk to was his character. So perhaps if you want to frame this another way, he has the decision between continuing on comfortably in a bureaucracy that's not serving its proper function, and by doing so, he'd put his character at stake. Becoming the sort of person who lives with that corruption cannot be a good thing. Alternatively, he can be the kind of person who takes that risk and risks externals for the sake of a greater purpose, a greater cause. And I think that's also something that other people are going to recognize and appreciate him for. I think a lot of courageous acts probably have this trait in common where, yes, he's pissing off a lot of the Roman elites. He's made a lot of enemies, but he's also made a lot of friends by cleaning the books and doing that sort of thing. So that's, I think, a nice example of a courageous act, because what's at stake is clear. And even though it's an ancient Stoic example, it's the sort of thing that is perhaps more similar to our modern lives than a lot of martial or military examples that come to mind from the ancients, where Cato essentially, when he's cleaning the books, when he's getting rid of the crooked bureaucrats, is just being a good bureaucrat, being a good knowledge worker, as it were, if you wanted to put it in the more modern terms. And it's perhaps not the kind of decision that's so alien to many people in the modern world as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I was thinking of a martial example, but like just that idea of, if somebody's getting bullied, we all want to help that person that's getting bullied, or hopefully you do. If you don't, you're missing another virtue, maybe justice or something like this. But then what stops you from helping the bully? Well, you're afraid of getting bullied yourself. You're afraid of that aggression getting turned on you. And so that's the courage is not wanting to help the person. The courage is then not being dissuaded by the consequences of that decision, if those are the kind of things that shouldn't be discouraging. So with the example of Cato, hopefully when we get into that, when we take a new job, when we get into new work, we come in kind of bright-eyed and optimistic, and we have this enthusiasm for doing things the right way. Well, what stops us from doing that? Well, we get discouraged. Well, people aren't going to like me. I'm going to have consequences. I'm not going to get promoted as quickly or move up in my job. And so courage is just not being dissuaded from the thing you think is you know to be right, when so many other people would be dissuaded. They would be pushed away from that right path because of their fears. And courageous person just doesn't have those fears because they know those bad things aren't actually bad. And I think that's the Stoic distinction there is like not doing it anyway, not doing it because the calculus comes out ahead in the positive things, but just not actually thinking those things are bad, not actually thinking they may be not preferable, but they're not actually the kind of things worth being afraid of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the key points is, so I think in mainstream popular culture, courage is often thought of as a way to manage fear, or I guess a virtue which represents someone overcoming fear, which I think it is in a Stoic sense, but more fundamentally, it's about what uh, deserves caution at all to begin with. And becoming a courageous person does involve overcoming fear. But I think especially as we start talking about the subcomponents, that's only a part of it. It's not the whole story by any means. Before we jump into those subcomponents, one other popular ancient account of courage comes from Aristotle. And he had this idea that many of the virtues were means between the vices. They lay in between the two vices, at least as a heuristic. So courage then would be the mean between recklessness and cowardice, which I think is a useful heuristic to think about courage, not in terms of charging in without any regard to the facts on the ground. That's reckless. And also, of course, not acting like a coward, sitting on the sidelines when you should be jumping into the fray, and so on, but acting with the right amount of prudence, skill, and caution that the situation demands. So I think that is it is a good rule of thumb. But if we wanted to be really precise about the Stoic account, what matters is building that excellent character, taking advantage of or using what is up to you well. And these ideas of, maybe recklessness, skill, and cowardice, so on, at least for Aristotle, sometimes depended on externals. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I don't like. There's a way to get into it. So obviously, what Aristotle thinks is not the same as what the Stoics think, in terms of the way that virtue. There's a knowledge component to virtue for Aristotle, but there's also kind of a habituation, training, irrational component. But I think you can totally adopt the mean for the Stoics as well, because this idea of courage being in between recklessness and cowardice, because this Stoic view of the virtue of courage is you're correctly understanding what to avoid. So there's two kinds of ways you get that wrong. You could be afraid of things that aren't worth being afraid of. That's cowardice. Or you could not be afraid of things that are worth being afraid of. That's recklessness. So I still think you can still have this balance. You're still looking for the balance. It's just the Stoics would think of this more like a binary. You either have it or you don't. Where if I was trying to make them as similar as possible, Aristotle is pointing to, I guess, the two kinds of ways you could go wrong. The thing with Aristotle, though, is Aristotle, I guess, in the Stoic picture, there's nothing stopping me from being both reckless and a coward, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I can be both of those things at the same time, because I can be not afraid of, I'm not afraid of acting like a bad person when I should be, but I'm afraid of what other people think of me when I shouldn't be. So I'm both reckless and a coward. Whereas Aristotle, you went more along a continuum, because it was kind of how you were habituated or how you were trained. So you tended to be reckless all the time, or you tended to be cowardly all the time. But I think for the Stoics, you could have both those errors at the same time, no problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. You could be, I suppose the virtues are unitary for the Stoics. You either have it or not. And if you think about different ways of carving up the virtue or a vice, in this case, you just can have multiple vices. There's no,
yeah,
unfortunately. Yeah, I thought that was well put, very clear. So we've got this account of what courage is for the Stoics at the highest level, knowledge of what to avoid. We've offered some examples, of course, but it's not as well known that the Stoics also broke things down at quite a level of detail and included the subcomponents of these different virtues. And we have several ancient sources that list about 5 to 7 subcomponents of courage, usually because we don't have access to the direct texts, but they're compiled by either biographers of ancient philosophers like Diogenes Laertius or other philosophers interacting with the Stoics. But I think there's enough overlap in these different sources that we can say, yeah, there were about 5, 7 or so different aspects of courage that the Stoics recognized. And I think going through these items can help make what courage is more complete, because we have this large abstract idea. Now, what does it look like in different situations? How can one improve courage? I think can be aided by that, so by some more detail.
Yeah, let's do it. We're totally worthwhile going into these.
All right, sweet. So at the very first one I want to talk about is endurance, which is the lasting knowledge of having judged correctly. It's also put by another secondary commenter as the knowledge of what is abiding secure, what is not, and what is neither. So an example of this would be persistence. Not giving up one's judgment just because one is hungry, tired, pressured, or anxious. Epictetus is someone who talks a lot about how the strength at which we hold our beliefs. And the thought is it's important to, when you come upon something that is true, hold that belief tightly such that it is knowledge and not be swayed from it in situations where either internal or external pressure is tempting you to do so. So that's this first element. Endurance is an important aspect of courage.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And not the kind of thing we would typically think about as courageous. I mean, I love that, right? You think of courageous as the big moments, not, how many bad days in a row can you have without breaking, while keeping on, while doing what you're supposed to do. And you think of that as a kind of courage, a kind of slow simmering courage instead of this kind of fire in the moment. I find that really inspiring. Yeah, so just that kind of strength of knowledge that, no, Epictetus talks about digesting your knowledge, but this idea, but thinking about it in terms of courage, I really, really like that. That's something that I'll be thinking about a lot, is just persistence as a quality, persistence in your beliefs, not being knocked off course as a component of being a courageous person is really, yeah, that's inspiring.
Yeah, I think one example of that is there are a set of well-known social experiments called the Ash experiments, where participants would be, set in a room of other people who were all in on this study, and they'd be shown some simple diagram, like, is line A bigger than line B, when line A was clearly bigger? And they would, raise their hand. Yes, of course, line A is bigger than B, and everyone else would disagree, and so on. And in some versions, you can have people do that experiment where, they just record their answer in their memory, and then everyone reports their answer at the end. And you can imagine someone having doubt at the end. Like, did I really see that line A was bigger than line B? And for me, I think if you have that perception at the beginning, just that, of course, line A is bigger than line B, and no reason to doubt your perception, something about holding firm to that memory, even in the face of moderate social pressure, I think is a good example of courage.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's the courage to not be persuaded, hold true to what you know to be true. Yeah, cool.
Cool. All right, so that's one component. Another component, translated as confidence, the knowledge that we are prepared, or said in another manner, the knowledge according to which we know that we are prepared. So it's reminiscent of Seneca's line, all things happen in a more endurable fashion to men who are prepared for them. And I think this is connected to confidence because, one definition of confidence is that expectation of success. Why do you expect success? Is because you are prepared, you're confident in, say, doing whatever it's going to be, because you've done it before, you've prepared for the moment, you know what's coming, and you expect things to go well. So I think this is a nice practical part of courage because it's something that connects directly to practice, which is coming to the different situations in life with that adequate preparation so that you aren't, so that you don't make mistakes, you can act skillfully in the moment.
Yeah, I love that. And like, what a great idea of how do you become more courageous? Well, you prepare more, right? If you think of courageous as, and you're like connecting that with persistence too, right? That idea of, well, how do I become more persistent? Because they're all interconnecting is another thing with these stoic, with these sub virtues, or these like different types of courage. They're all connected to courage, right? And it's like, well, number one, like one way to be courageous, don't change your beliefs as you go. Don't change your mind. Okay, what's another way to be courageous? Prepare for the situation like that, and that's another way to not change your mind is to have prepared for it appropriately. Be confident in your preparation, and you won't. I think of that in sports, right? You have a game plan. There's kind of a courage required to commit to the game plan. You're losing 1-0. You're losing 2-0. You're losing 3-0, and you start to say, part of you wants to say, well, screw it, you know? But there's a kind of courage that comes to sticking to it. And that is only increased by preparation, by practice, by training. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got endurance, we've got confidence, confidence built through preparation. This other aspect, some virtue, if you will, in Greek is megalopsychia, which is, I notice in a lot of commenters was translated as high-mindedness or nobility. So it's the knowledge of being above one person puts it as the knowledge of being above what befalls both the wise and fools. What it literally means is greatness of soul. I think you can imagine someone who goes through the world with a kind of nobility or presence that isn't disturbed by the happenings of the day. They're able to handle both great fortune and adversity because I think they put it in their place. They don't overvalue it. They're in a sense above it.
I mean, I think in terms of the translation, I think megalopsychia is, it's just a great souledness. It reminds me of Aristotle's magnanimous. But now that I think about it, Aristotle, they talk about the magnanimous person in Aristotle. But now that I think about it, that's actually Latin. Anima is Latin for the soul. So I wonder if Aristotle was talking about megalopsychia too. But that's something for me to look up. But what I was struck by was how all of these are not about like, they're types of courage of being kind of like cool, calm, and collected. All of them are coming together. Like I think about, when you think about who's that kind of person who like, they would just be the coolest, calmest person under pressure. Well, they'd be the kind of person who doesn't change their mind just because they're being peer pressured. They'd be the kind of person who'd be prepared for the situation. And then this one, greatness of soul, sounds very dramatic, but it's just like they don't sweat the small stuff. They know what they're there to do. They're not going to get stressed out by changes, like small changes. They're even going to have a good perspective on big changes. And like, if you lose the game, well, sometimes people lose the games, that kind of perspective to rise above the waves that thrash other people around. And so I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Stoicism teaches you how to be stoic, teaches you how to be cool and calm and collected and not the first person charging into the battlefield. But I'm struck by how much these ideas of courage are like connecting with that and not connecting with like the big climactic moment in the fight or the sacrifice. It's just like, how to be calm. Well, don't sweat the small stuff again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's important. I think one aspect of this, of greatness of soul, or this reminded me of Epictetus, and he talks about wanting to be the purple thread in the toga, which is that thread that I think was on the outer layer of fancier more prestigious. Togas, it was more expensive to make because of the dye involved in producing it. And it stood apart from the rest, from the other thread. And I think the person who has greatness of soul, in a sense, has the courage to stand apart from others because they ultimately value different things, or at least are committed to valuing their character, these internal aspects, as opposed to what so many people value, like externals or
Yeah.
comforts and so on. So that's not a push to be alienated, but I think there is always some amount of social pressure to go along with others by valuing the same things, even if those things are not important in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, well, the purple thread is just it's that key Stoic idea. You're not sweating the small stuff, not because you're numb or you're tougher, but because you don't care. You genuinely don't care because you value something different. You value being the purple in the robe, or you value your character, not the other things that are actually upsetting people. Um, and then this is a bit of a Greek nerd out, but um, the magnanimous soul from Aristotle, which in Nicomachean Ethics, he talks about that as being like, the key, I think like the key crown virtue, right? Like this ultimate state that is megalopsychia in the Greek. So that is that same idea that Aristotle talks about kind of being the highest quality or the best quality to have.
Mm.
The Stoics here are putting it as a type of courage, because I guess the main benefit of this, well, maybe it's not the benefit actually of the cause. What causes uh this greatness of soul is that ability to rise above, is that ability to not be affected by what affects, pulls down, and disturbs normal people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's a ability to rise above common desires, fears, and having a better sense of what to desire, what to be averse to. I suppose is the thought. Awesome. So now we're at 3. The fourth component I wanted to talk about is eusychia, which translates very basically into good mind or good soul, but is also put as also translated as cheerfulness by some, or in English is translated as cheerfulness by some modern commentators, and described as a good tone, sort of having vigor, especially towards the completion of your projects. The way I think about this is, I think cheerfulness doesn't exactly capture what's expressed, though. Perhaps some who are better at ancient Greek can argue with me on this, but especially in the records we have, the use of this term was sort of like having the vigor to complete what was important. So perhaps I think vitality may be a better translation, as opposed to cheerfulness, which probably in English has a kind of lightness now to it. Not exactly a frivolity, but just feeling good and expressing that feeling outwardly. I think vitality might capture the root of it, where it's being alive, healthy, and having the energy to complete what's needed in the moment is how I think of this component.
Yeah, well, I wonder, I mean, yeah, the eusychia, I would have to see the rest of the Greek. I mean, that's just is just good, so it's just good soul, whereas the other one was great soul. Um, so it's just interesting here what that good means. I think you're right, cheerfulness doesn't get it right. I think vitality is a better translation, I agree. But I'm wondering, I mean, I want to spend time around the guy that's eusychia. That sounds fun, but I'm wondering what the Stoics are defending against here. Like, because I love this picture the Stoics are giving. Like, you want to be great souled, but then you don't want to take yourself too seriously, right? You don't want to be the way I'm understanding it, you don't want to be so intense about everything. You want to have a bit of a vitality and vigor to what you do. But I guess it's like, why would it be cowardly not to have that vitality? Maybe you're taking something too seriously, or you're missing out on good things. I'm not sure. You're avoiding good things that shouldn't be avoided. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, Arius Didymus is the fellow who talked about this. He has a small tract called the Epitome on Stoic Ethics that might be worth going through. It's I suppose one of those less well-known Stoic type works. What they're trying to get at here, my sense is the what can take many people away from finishing what they started is a lack of strength of mind. So I think they're talking about a strength of mind that's connected with what we've discussed: endurance, confidence, greatness of soul, but has a kind of positivity to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what cheerfulness gets right, what vitality gets right, and energy towards doing what needs to be done. So the, my sense is that's, we're asking what's new in this account, or at least what would separate it from someone who is cowardly. And that's that sometimes the cowardly might fail to be courageous because they don't have the energy to complete what's important, what they ought to be doing. And it's not just that I think they're literally, falling asleep, and it's not something like they're physically unable to, give if they're doing something courageous, maybe it's a simple manner of giving a speech. They're not, their body isn't putting them to sleep or anything like this. It's that they don't have the skill for working with fatigue, or the skill to be energetic in order to be courageous. That's how I understand this. Maybe it's going a little bit too far afield, but how I was both separating it from those previous subcomponents, and also thinking about and the aspect of courage that this is pointing out is that often courage requires a kind of working with negative feelings. One of those negative feelings is fear, but another kind of negative feeling that can prevent acting courageously is fatigue, not being energetic in the right way. And those either need to be overcome, or, one needs to sort of be energetic enough such that you're able to follow through and not worry about whatever negative feelings arise.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like while you were talking, I was thinking of this idea based on what you were saying of, carpe diem, of seize the day. Well, what stops you from seizing the day? Fear or anxiety, but also, a lack of energy, a lack of excitement, procrastination, sloth, things like this. And so a certain degree of vitality gets you out there doing those courageous things instead of, I guess, being lazy. I guess not getting out there and
Mm.
doing it.
Cool. So last one I want to talk about is industriousness. In the Greek, philoponia, which just means a love of work. And in particular, going back to this aspect of knowledge, I think it's important for the Stoics that you know what your work is and why you're doing it. Why is it worthwhile? And because you have this love of the task, you're better able to stick with it, better able to be industrious when it matters. And they're not talking about being, what sometimes people talk about being a workaholic or working for its own sake. Seneca himself rails against people who are busy. Busyness for its own sake is a sign of a haunted mind. Instead, I think this aspect of courage is about knowing, what your work is and why it's important, why it's worth doing. And from that knowledge grounds a love of work.
Mm-hmm.
And we can think about, again, how this connects to some of these other subcomponents. With that love comes motivation, the ability to endure, persist through internal and external obstacles.
I mean, these are pumping me up, Caleb. These are getting me these sub virtues. I mean, courage doesn't really do much for me. I'll be honest. Be courageous. I don't know. It doesn't really. I guess because it's too amorphous. It's too general. It's like, yeah, of course. It's kind of like, be a good person or something. It's like, yeah, well, I'm already trying. Like, thanks for the help. But these are like a nice level of specificity that really, I see the appeal here. I've always been one. This is a bit of a side topic. I've always been a person to like not really understand the core Stoic virtues, or I understood them, but I would say, well, you know, I wouldn't really use them too strongly as part of my practice. Being like, well, I'm going to focus on wisdom today, or I'm going to focus on temperance. I wouldn't really do that. But these subtypes, they're really, really helpful for getting specific. And I really see how, a courageous person, yeah, sure, maybe that's good, maybe that's not. But, well, I mean, certainly good, but, it's kind of general. But
Sure, sure.
somebody here who, confidently thinks what they think, prepares for what they're about to do, doesn't sweat the small stuff, has a vitality and kind of joy as they go about it, picking their tasks, and then a love for the tasks as they do them. Wow, that's a more specific type of person that's really admirable, and I'm really getting a kick out of it. The other thing I was thinking here with Philoponia or Ponia was that the Epicureans have aponia as an end goal, which is really like the absence of pain that comes from kind of toil or forced work. And so I think the Stoics are kind of like me sticking it to the Epicureans here, which is to say, another way to be happy is to like what you do instead of just like, not having to do it. And I think that's true, right? Like, I don't think you should do work you don't like, or you should try not to. We shouldn't glorify work we don't like, but I think we should try as much as we possible to like the work that we do, and to come to terms with or find a way to find meaning or engage with the work that's necessary, as you were saying. And
Mm-hmm.
that's such a, again, it's that knowledge of what to avoid, right? It's like meaningful work isn't to be avoided.
Right.
Unnecessary work, unnecessary toil, inefficient work, something that doesn't connect well with who you are or what inspires you or what you're good at or what's necessary. This is to be avoided. But good, meaningful, productive work is something to find meaning, purpose, and joy in. And I think that really resonates with me.
Awesome. Yeah, excellent. These subcomponents are useful for thinking about, what are concrete situations that arise? How can I be more courageous? Again, that's pretty general. Maybe, but you can make some progress by thinking about, where can I have more endurance? Where should I prepare more? Where, if anywhere, in my life should I exhibit more of that greatness of soul? How can I cultivate vitality? How can I be industrious, not just for its own sake, but loving worthwhile tasks? Some commonalities of all of these is that they all focus on knowledge, knowing what is good, what's worth enduring, worth doing, worth standing up for. And of course, that comes back just to the general Stoic picture and the fact that all of these are part of courage, which is knowing what to avoid, and gives you that sense of, if you know what to avoid, you also know what to pursue. Something else that stuck out to me while reading over this list has something we've already mentioned, but can make, I think, explicit, is that they're not all about managing fear. If you think about something like industriousness, that's just, cultivating love for a task, or vitality. That's not so much about managing fear as being a energetic, positive person, as opposed to thinking about, where am I, where can I be less anxious, and so on. So I think you both get that broader focus on different kinds of traits, and also something that can replace that project of simply reducing negative feelings, reducing negative emotions. Maybe it's better to focus on, what sorts of positive traits can one create in different circumstances. So I think that's an important lesson that I've been trying to put more and more into practice, and also trying to communicate, I think, to the Stoic community, as it were.
Yeah, it's an aspirational goal, and when you set your sights on these things, there will be no fear left to battle, right? So if you're battling fear, you're kind of, I don't know if you're starting at the wrong spot, but you're kind of focusing on it's like you're trying to build knowledge and you're like focusing on your ignorance. Well, no, try to learn something, try to move
Mm-hmm.
towards knowledge, set that positive goal for yourself instead of, focusing on your ignorance, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So we can end by talking about this, a quote from Seneca on making progress, and then summarize our thoughts. So this is from letter 71, and it's a long quote. I'll just read it out now. I do not withdraw the wise man from the category of man, nor do I deny to him the sense of pain as though he were a rock that has no feelings at all. I remember that he is made up of two parts. The one part is irrational. It is this that may be bitten, burned, or hurt. And the other part is rational. It is this which holds resolutely to opinions, is courageous, and unconquerable. In the latter is situated man's supreme good. Before this is completely attained, the mind wavers in uncertainty. Only when it is fully achieved is the mind fixed and steady. And so, when one has just begun, or is on one's way to the heights and is cultivating virtue, or even if one is drawing near the perfect good, but has yet to put the finishing touch upon it, one will retrograde at times, and there will be a certain slacking of mental effort. For such a man has not yet traversed the doubtful ground. He is still standing in slippery places. And I think that I chose this quote just because there's, of course, a reminder that the Stoic path involves progress on one hand, but also setbacks. There's that message of, one, the Stoic path involves progress and setbacks. And then two, a large aspect of making progress is being courageous, managing doubt, managing those temptations to either act with recklessness or cowardice, as it were.
Yeah, what a great quote. Standing in slippery places, we all are. And yeah, the courage as I don't know if courage has a special place among the virtues, but it seems to be the one that, as you said, is responsible for whether or not you maintain the progress and everything else you've made, right? It all is a kind of intellectual courage. I think of this in terms of people who, they start a diet and they have one bad day and then the whole diet falls apart. Or you set a goal for yourself and you have one bad one setback and the whole thing falls apart. And we don't often call that courage, but it is a kind of courage to get back on the horse, to try again, to stick with the plan. And so that'll be really my big takeaway, besides those specific ideas, those specific subtypes of virtue, that idea of thinking about perseverance as a virtue, thinking about handling doubt as a virtue, staying true to what you know as a virtue, as a virtue of courage specifically. Yeah, really well put by Seneca.
Yeah. The example of the diet gets across are people failing to live up to their diets and so on. The related phenomenon that happens when people set these rules for themselves, fail, and then often because they failed, there's that permission to fail completely, as it were, either in the diet case or, you wanted to go to bed by a certain time, you look at the clock, you realize it's past that time, and then decide, well, I didn't make it, so might as well continue working, watching this Netflix show, whatever it is. You fail with abandon. And I think part of
Yeah, Caleb, did you just? Oh, it's too late. Might as well keep working. Well, that's I think that speaks to your to your work ethic, uh, your work ethic more than the common experience. Most people, myself included, it's like, well, gonna keep going through these Instagram memes. Caleb's like, gonna keep writing some content. Yeah, that's funny.
Are you saying I have a haunted mind?
Yeah, exactly. This is it's a nice kind of trouble to have.
But I think part of addressing that issue, I suppose, has to do with discipline and moderation. But I suppose there is also a kind of a courage to recognize, I made this plan for myself, even though I failed my initial goal. That shouldn't distract me. One can still hold firm what was important, and then close the laptop or whatever.
Well, maybe moderation sets the plan. Says that's probably good if I go to bed at this time, or I don't go to bed past this time, and then courage is what keeps you on it. Both to do it and to, kind of cut out the silly excuses if it's 20 minutes too late.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. All right, cool. So just to summarize, we talked about courage, one of the 4 cardinal virtues for the Stoics. At the highest level, it's the knowledge of what to avoid. Then we broke down some of the subcomponents of virtue, the ability to endure with one's judgments, especially when those judgments amount to knowledge, having the confidence that's grounded in preparation, exhibiting a kind of greatness of soul that's grounded in the knowledge of what truly matters, acting with vitality, and then also showing a kind of industriousness, a love of the task. And I think that those are some aspects of courage that we see in the ancient Stoic tradition. I think one last thought I wanted to leave with is that I think especially when we talk about courage, there's this thought to think about, the big historical moments where one is courageous, which there certainly are. I think probably many people in their life, even if they're not faced with, big historical moments, there are, in a real sense, epic challenges and so on. But, virtue, if someone's virtuous, they show that, exhibit that virtue in whatever circumstance they're in, even if they're, so to speak, small situations, domestic situations and ordinary life. And I think what matters is whether you have that. For the Stoics, what matters is whether you have that character trait at all, not really what situation you find yourself in. So it can be just as valuable to show virtue, show courage in those ordinary moments. I think, one line that I really like is, the Stoic is someone who does the ordinary in extraordinary ways, which I think gets at this idea.
Yeah, well, to build on it, if the Stoic idea is that you can be happy on the torture rack, which means even if something terrible happens to a great person, it doesn't make them any less of a great person. The flip side to it is like, even if that great person just lives a very ordinary life, they don't lead an army, they don't rule a country, they don't invent something, they're still a great person, because that greatness can't be hampered by negative externals, nor can it be magnified by positive externals. The greatness is the greatness. That's a difference with Aristotle, right? Because Aristotle would argue that, well, you need a certain amount of to have a really great life, you need a certain amount of success, both because your life wouldn't be great if your family died, if you had bad health, things like this, but also because your greatness was magnified. The rich great person has more money to donate. They can help more people. And this is something the Stoics aren't thinking. Your greatness isn't magnified by the circumstance you find yourself in. It's still that just as great in ordinary situations, as you were saying.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's well put. Awesome. Anything else to add?
No, or it looks like we're going to have to do a courage part 2 at some point, but that was really fun.
Thanks for listening to Stoic Conversations. Please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and share it with a friend. If you want to dive deeper still, search Stoa in the App Store or Play Store for a complete app with routines, meditations, and lessons designed to help people become more stoic. And I'd also like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. You can find more of his work at ancientlyre.com. And finally, please get in touch with us. Send a message to stoa@stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback, questions, or recommendations. Until next time.